Okay, so today we're going to be working on a recipe out of the Backpack Gourmet. This is a cookbook that is set up for cooking and dehydrating meals for when you're out camping. The one that we are going to work on today is going to be the shrimp jambalaya. So getting ready for that, we've already done the quinoa, so we have that all measured out and in the pan and all cooked up, so that will be ready for us. And then for the rest of the recipe then, we're going to get a big pot out, and then we're going to do some minced onion in there, and then we're also going to get some bell pepper minced in there, some mushrooms. And now Thomas, on those recipes, on the ingredients, it says to mince that. Now, what does that mean and why are we mincing these?
Mincing it means to make it a finer. It's finer than chopped up because these are going to be dehydrated. So when we mince, so if we chop them instead of mince them, it's going to take longer to dehydrate and longer to rehydrate when you're on the trail.
So it'll be a lot easier on the trail if these are minced. Now you can chop it. One thing that I will do is I will do a mix. So in our mushrooms, I minced a lot of the mushroom, but I do have a few bigger chunks in there. The onion, because that does cook down, I did leave that a little bit bigger. The green pepper, I've got a mix, no pieces really big. And then the shrimp, I did mince some really down, and then we have some bigger pieces in there so that you do get some bigger pieces when you're on the trail. Hopefully they rehydrate well, but if they're not super rehydrated, you're going to get a little bit of crunch to them, but at least they're dehydrated. We then do have the tomatoes. We have some tomatoes that we canned from this past summer. For the white beans, I couldn't find the smaller white beans, so we've got the Great Northern beans. So those are going to be a little bit bigger than you would normally like in the dehydration, but they'll work out, especially since they're going to be cooked down before we put it in. And then for spices, some cayenne pepper and some thyme is what's on the recipe. As I was pulling those out, I did notice we had some Cajun seasoning in there, and for a jambalaya, I thought Cajun seasoning would be good. So I did pull out a little bit of our Cajun seasoning. So that's the setup, and now we're going to switch over and we'll actually show you the preparation of this as we cook it. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is get the 2 tablespoons of oil in here. We've already got that in here. It's already hot. I've already had that going, so it's probably a little bit too hot. So this is probably going to spark up at us. But we're going to go ahead and add the onion in. So we want to get all the onion in there. And then we're going to add green pepper. So we have the green pepper in. And then also the mushroom, and we'll get the mushroom in. And we're going to get that all in and saute. And Thomas, how long do we let that cook for?
We're going to let it sit for about 10 minutes, or while stirring, I think.
Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more oil to that. And it's looking a little bit dry to me. Quite a bit that we have in there. So I'm going to add a little bit more olive oil. We do want to keep that fairly limited on the oil, and also on the fat. When you're working with the dehydrators, fats are not your friends. You don't want to have any fat in that, or as little as possible. It just does not store well. So we're going to go ahead, let this cook for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk to you about the next step. Okay, so we've had this cooking for about 10 minutes. We've got this kind of sauteed and cooked down, and now we need to add some more ingredients. What do we have up next on the list there, Thomas?
We're adding the rest of the ingredients. So it's the tomatoes, the white beans, the shrimp, the thyme, the salt, and the cayenne, and in our case, the Cajun.
Okay, so there's the tomatoes. And then we also add the shrimp in this step.
Yep.
Okay, so go ahead and add the shrimp in. Gonna give it a shake.
Try not to cover the bowl.
Yeah, with it being minced, it's kind of packed down in there pretty good. Really gonna have to make sure that they get stirred in really good, so it's not just a big a mass that's in there. And then the beans, go ahead and put the beans in.
Where's the salt at?
So it is calling for some salt. I usually have a tendency to omit salt. I like to kind of keep salt out of my diet, and that's one thing I like about doing the dehydrated meals on my own, is that I can control that. A lot of the prepared meals that you get, if you look at the sodium content, a lot of the preservative content in them, it's actually pretty high. So I'm actually going to omit the salt out of this recipe. But how much of the rest of those seasonings do we need to add in, Thomas?
2 teaspoons of the thyme. Yeah, because this would be minced fresh thyme, right?
No, that would be dried thyme.
Oh, then 1 teaspoon.
Okay, so we need a teaspoon of the dried thyme.
And 1/4 of the cayenne, and then whatever you feel like for the Canadian.
Okay, so just to make life easy, I'm just going to use the 1/4 teaspoon. So we need to do a, what is it, 1/4 teaspoon of the cayenne?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll go ahead and do a 1/4 teaspoon of the cayenne. And I'm going to be a little bit generous on that. I like it a little bit spicy. Also, it's really good to go strong on your flavors with the dehydrated. Just because when you dehydrate them, you do lose some of that flavor out of it. So you're going to go stronger. And then we want a teaspoon of the dried thyme. And because I used the 1/4 teaspoon to save on dishes on that, I'm going to do 4 of these because I have the 1/4 teaspoon. Again, just making life easy on the cleanup. Again, kind of generous on my measurements there. And then on the Cajun seasoning, I'm going to match the cayenne. I'm going to do a 1/4 teaspoon, and actually I'm going to change that. I'm going to go ahead and do just about a half on that. It says to bring it to a boil. There wasn't a lot of liquid in with the tomatoes that we had, and we already had the pan pretty hot, so we're already up to a pretty good boil there. And I believe now the next step on that is that it wants us to let that simmer, kind of let those flavors cook into each other. Definitely want to make sure that shrimp, because it was raw shrimp, make sure that gets cooked in there pretty good. And then, what did it say, Thomas? It wants that to go how long?
Simmer for 5.
Okay, so we're gonna let this go for about 5 minutes. Just let it simmer. So I'll turn down the heat on that so it simmers. We'll let that go 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and wrap this up. Okay, so we've had this simmering for about 5 minutes. Everything's kind of mixed in really good. All the flavors should be mixed in well. So now what we're going to do is the next to last step, the actually last step of the recipe, which is to stir the quinoa in that we made in the earlier steps. So we have the quinoa, and we're just going to get that all mixed down in here. And it's looking like this is going to just about, I would say that this is probably about 3/4 of the way full in this pot. So we're going to get this all mixed in together. And this recipe is set up to serve 4. So if I were to take this out backpacking, you could do this really for any meal, but I would probably lean towards this for dinner, especially for the volume that it's going to be when it's done. This is going to be a really solid meal for dinner. Now the other thing I could do is when I go to package this up, which we'll show you how to do after it's dehydrated, is I could do it into smaller servings as well. So I was thinking as I looked at this that this would be really too much for me to have in a serving. I could break that down into smaller servings. But we'll just get this all mixed in here together so that everything is evenly divided and mixed. So we've got a nice mixture of all the different ingredients in with the quinoa, so that we don't have just one big mass of quinoa in a serving. We want to make sure that everybody's getting all of the different flavors, the different ingredients mixed in with their final product. And we could do some of that after it's dehydrated as well. I just like to really make sure that it's mixed together for that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish stirring this up, and then what we'll do is we'll go over to the dehydrator, and I'll show you how I mix that up or how I lay it out on the dehydrator. And that should be the just about the last step. The last piece is kind of packaging it up, but we'll have to wait for a few hours for that, and I'll talk about that as I'm putting it on the dehydrator. So we'll be back in just a minute to show you how this gets laid out on the dehydrator. Okay, so we've got that all stirred together. Then the last piece is to put it on the dehydrator. Now adding the quinoa in really took away a lot of the liquid as far as just sitting liquid on it. But you're still going to want to, on your trays, have some kind of liner. Now the dehydrator that I've got here, this is only about my second or third time using this one, and definitely the first time for a backpacking meal that I've had to use a liner. This dehydrator didn't come with liners on it, so I actually bought some Teflon sheets and cut them out. The big thing is you don't want the big grid on the back, otherwise you're going to have a lot of stuff falling down through. So I've got the Teflon sheet on there, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scoop this out onto the sheets, and as you're doing this you will see that there is some liquid on there, and I'll show a close-up of it here just in a second. But what you want to do is get a nice even layer on here. You don't want it super thick, so make sure that you're spreading it out and getting a good layer on there. That way when it dries, it will dry evenly. Now we're going to do this, the recipe in the book says about 145 degrees. My dehydrator, the setting, the highest goes up to 155. So I'm going to set it just a little bit underneath the highest, and then it says that it needs to go for about 6 hours. So we'll go ahead and let that go. I have a tendency just to let them run overnight. Just kind of depends on what my schedule is, and I just keep an eye on it as I'm working on it. So as we get this done here, again, nice even layer, and let me finish this layer up, and then I'll give you a look at it. So this is the layer that we have tilted a little bit. So it goes up to about the ring on this tray. Different dehydrators, it's going to be different levels. There's a little bit of moisture in here, you're going to get that, but again with the quinoa it's kind of sucked a lot of that up, and I'm seeing some in the pan. But what I'm going to do is kind of make sure that I'm kind of moving away from that as I load it up, just so that I'm not putting a whole lot of extra liquid in here that's just going to have to dry anyways. On this dehydrator, I have 5 trays. Hopefully that should be enough for this. So we'll get this all loaded up, we'll get this dehydrated out, and once it is done, we'll give you some shots and kind of show you how the final product looks. But for the most part, that's all it is. You're going to cook up your meal. The one thing, as Thomas mentioned earlier, is you're going to make sure that you're mincing it more than just chopping it. As I'm looking at this one, this came out, looks really well. I think the beans, when we go to rehydrate, are probably going to be probably the crunchiest part of this. And then if you also want to bring your own seasoning when you rehydrate, as I said, it loses some of the flavor when you dehydrate. And this is kind of a jambalaya, so if you like yours spicy like I do, you might want to take some hot sauce, maybe some hot peppers with you, so that when you do rehydrate it, you can add that fresh, and then you'll have that seasoning on there. But that's the main part of it, and then we'll wrap up in about 6 hours or so. and show you what you do with the final product that's all been dehydrated.